Hello, and thank you so much for joining me. We're going to be painting these four cute watercolor designs. They're super easy and fun to do. I hope you'll enjoy painting them together. So let's get started. I've traced mine out lightly beforehand, but if you like to have your design traced out as well, you can skip ahead to the end to see the finished images and just kind of lightly trace yours out on your watercolor paper before you start painting. And then for supplies, I'm using some Arches cold pressed paper today, and I've just cut it up into little cards so we can work on each one at a time. And I'll be using Winsor & Newton Cotman watercolors that I've just put into this palette of mine here. And I just spray them with water to kind of loosen them up when I'm going to paint with them. And then I'll be mixing the colors I need in this little ceramic palette. And I use Princeton Select. I find them to be very affordable, but they definitely do the trick for what I need. Those are the basic supplies I have. Besides that, I have some water to clean my brush and some paper towel here to wipe my brush between. So yeah, let's get started. I'm going to be working on these little mittens first. So for these mittens, I'm going to mix a kind of reddish brown. Want a warm, cozy color. Just going to grab some brown to start. And adding water as we go to keep the color nice and diluted so it spreads really easily once we're using it. And then I'll add a bit more of a reddish tone, a little more brown, and just keep mixing until you get what you think you're looking for. I want a little bit of a reddish, rusty brown color, so I think that looks like what I'm going for. Now I've got that all mixed up, I'm going to start putting it down onto the paper. So taking some more water, so I don't want to start the first layer too dark. You always want to go a bit diluted for your first layer, and then you can always add more color after. You can't take away pigment, but you can add it. So definitely good to start with a lighter version. Let's start putting that paint down here. So I'm just doing it directly onto the dry paper for this one. There's different techniques you can do, like wet on wet, but I sometimes like to just add the outline of where I'm going and then add some water to help it spread around and allow those edges to be more defined and pigmented right off the bat. So I'll grab a little bit of water here and start spreading some of that around. And as you can see, that leaves my edges where I initially started with the paint looking more pigmented than the center. And as you add more water in the middle, it keeps it really nice and thin there while allowing the more concentrated color to really stay around the edges. And then you can add a little bit more before it dries. So grabbing a little more paint, just adding some where I think the darker part of the mittens would be, like here where the thumb curves in, and here at the edge of the mitten. Keeping it nice and light in the middle where it's that kind of chunkier, rounder part of the mitten. And then a little bit more color at the bottom here where it connects with the fluffy part that we're going to add at the bottom of the mitten. And as it dries, that color is going to spread and pool nicely and focus on the areas where you added more pigment. So you'll get nice depth to your shape just by dropping more color into those parts. A little bit more here, and then I'll let it dry. So you do want to let your first mitten dry before you go in and add the second one. So you'll see in the light here it's still quite wet, and if I add another color next to it right now while it's really wet, it's going to bleed together. Sometimes that can look good, and that's definitely fine if that's the look you're going for, but I want the two shapes to be more well defined right now, so I'm just going to let it dry. And once that's done, I will go in and paint the other mitten beside it. Okay, so we can see that it's pretty well dry now, but now that that's ready and it looks dry enough that it's not going to bleed together, we can go in and paint the other mitten. So starting with the same color, same kind of technique outlining the shape of the mitten. Still being a little cautious until I test that it's really truly dry. And then outlining. If you're worried your outlining is going a bit slow and drying, you can start grabbing your water to spread your color a bit as you go. So you don't want your outline to get too harsh. And if it dries, it can get a little bit too crispy, kind of. Okay, so now we're going to start adding that water into the center to keep it nice, light, and diluted in the center. And again, more concentrated at those edges there. Grabbing some more of that color, putting it at the bottom and the sides. And definitely more concentrated here because this thumb is overlapping or is overlapped by the one above it. Just going to dry that off to make sure it's not too wet and get more control. But I really want this part to be a little bit darker to show the shadow from that other one. I think I'm actually going to grab a little bit more brown to make my color a bit darker. That should be good. And now comes the patience again. We have to wait for it to dry. The nice thing about this one is because we already waited for this mitten to dry in the first place, we can start adding the bottom of that one while this one dries. You just have to be very careful if you're painting over here so that you're not rubbing your hand over this side while it's still wet. But you can always tilt it a bit. And again, these little cards make it so easy to move it around as you need. You don't have a whole big page that you have to adjust. So it's pretty easy to avoid touching those parts while they're still wet. So we'll go in and add the bottom part of this mitten here. And for that one, I want a similar color, but a little bit lighter, like more of a whitish tan version of it. So I'll start out with some brown again. Just grabbing some plain brown here and just keeping it really, really watered down. I might actually add the tiniest bit of pink to it. So I want mine to be a little bit more that kind of cool pinkish tan. So taking a little bit of this, we'll tilt it to allow this part, which as you can see is still a little bit wet, just to make sure that I'm not running my hand over it. I'm going to outline the bottom fluffy part of these mittens. As you can see, my color is really watered down, just like I wanted it to be. So doing that, outline the bottom and then take some water and spread it out a bunch just to give it a really light wash. I'm going to dry off my brush here and lift up even more of that color. I really want it to be very faded and light for the bottom of these mittens. And we can add more detail with an outline after, but to start, we're just going to keep it really light. You can add a little bit of water and dry your brush to pick up some of the color to keep it even lighter in the center. So I'm just doing that on mine, added some water into the center here and let it spread around to really push the color to the edges. Dry your brush so it's a nice thirsty brush. It's going to pick up some of that water you have on here. So you can see that that's wet. So with my dry brush going in and picking up some of that color, really creates that nice gradient where the outside edges are darker and the middle is really light and looks nice and kind of fluffy. That's what I'm going for. And as you can see, this one is pretty dry now, so I'm going to go in and do the same thing on the bottom of the other mitten. So just take that color and outline that shape and do a really light wash using water to spread it kind of all over, and then we'll pick up some of the pigment after. Drop a tiny bit more around the edges here. Grab my water, put it in the center, dry my brush so it's nice and thirsty, and go and pick up some of that water and pigment. So we'll let that dry for now, and we're going to go in with some of this color and create a bit of a darker wash to add some detail work to the mittens. Now you might think this brush is a bit large for detail work, but we are just going to use the very tip of it to do the design, so it should be fine. You could go for a smaller brush. This is a size 3, so it's already pretty small, and I like to try to use the same size brush for as much of my painting as I can. I feel like it makes it really accessible and I don't have to buy a million different supplies, so I'm just going to stick to the same one, but you're welcome to use one that's a little bit smaller if you have one. So I'm going to mix this a tiny bit darker so I have more to go around, so that should be good. Now I'm going to take my brush and dry it off to make sure I get a really nice point. My brushes are getting a bit old and craggly, so they're not always as smooth as I want them to be, but that should do. A little bit of water, but not too much, dry it off, and then pick up some of this, and we'll go in and start doing the design on the first mitten. I'm going to start with a line like this across the top here. Just like that. And even though we're still doing a light wash, you want it to be a bit more concentrated so it can really stand out on the color underneath. I'm just drip, 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 dripping some more of the color in there. And oh, forgot to check this was dry, but it was dry enough that I didn't smear it or anything. Remember to make sure that your other layer is dry every time you're running your hands over something you already painted. And underneath that, I'm going to do a squiggle line here. So again, very detailed with the tip of the brush. Just going to squiggle it like that and drop in a bit more of the color while it's wet. And since your layer underneath is very dry, you'll get a really nice defined shape to that. And now doing the same, but we're going to add a couple little dots underneath here. So 1, 2, 3 dots where the squiggly line goes up. 1, 2, 3 little dots. Then we're going to do one more straight line all the way across here. I need to make some more color. Sometimes I just don't mix enough. You want to kind of mix more than you will need so you don't run out of it halfway, and then you can make sure all of it matches. So if you run out, it can be a little bit hard to match the color sometimes. Okay, hopefully I got a good match there. I might just drop a tiny bit of it into this line to make sure that it really matches. And now 3 more little dots just underneath this line, kind of matching where those dots were. So 1, 2, 3. Now I'm going to go do the same thing on this mitten over here. Hopefully I don't run out of my color. So starting off with a straight line. Now grabbing more to do that squiggly line underneath. How many? 1, 2, 3 squiggles up to match the other one. So 1, 2, 3, oop, almost 4. Just need 3 dots here where the squiggles go up. 1, 2, 3. Straight line across down here. Just enough paint for my 3 little dots. 1, 2, and 3. Okay, that looks good. Just gonna let that dry. And I'm gonna take some of the lighter color here, add a little bit of water just to stretch it a bit more, and add a couple lines on the fluffy down part of the mittens. I'm just gonna add like 6 little lines here. I start in the middle to make sure that my spacing ends up right. So 1, 2, and just 2 on either side of those. 1, 2, and there we go. And same on the other side. 2 in the center. 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. And while I'm in here, I'm going to take a little bit of it and just add a tiny bit of detail to the very bottom to make it look like it has a bit more depth. Move that little guy aside to finish drying while we start our next one.